But I know that that your views evolved, partly as a result of reading Birdsong. Isn't that correct?
Yes, well, that was quite early on in this
Mm.
process. When I was a Don in Cambridge, I was a fellow of Clare. I was working on developmental biology. I already came to the conclusion morphogenetic fields were a key part of it. And when I read Bergson's book, Matter and Memory, and it made a huge impression because Bergson shows that memory doesn't have to be material, it's a relation in time, and the idea that memory is stored in the brain, he showed is actually a false conception of memory. I found it tremendously persuasive, and by generalizing his ideas about memory, I came to the idea of memory in all nature through morphic resonance, with each species having a kind of collective memory. But the stimulus for that really was Bergson, and I was wrestling with the idea of transmission of influence over time, which I thought must be happening in nature,
Yes.
in biology and in evolution. I'd already come to that conclusion, and I just couldn't see how this could work. And then when I read Bergson, it was a liberation for me. It fell into place.
Yes, and you also had a professor, I believe, who had some interesting experiences in Cambridge.
Well, I had several
Mm.
very good mentors and guides in Cambridge, and actually one of them was a professor of history. Oh, no, he was a Don in history in my college, Charles Parkin he was called, who was keen on L.L. White and holistic philosophy in general, and I'd never heard of all that. So he was enormously helpful to me in making me aware of the broader currents of holistic thinking.
Yes. And Peter, what was your experience at an earlier stage when generating your interest in consciousness?
My experience is very straightforward. When you went to a physiology book in the 50s and you looked up consciousness in the index, it wasn't there. And as I said before, it was just levels of alertness. And there were these lovely diagrams which showed how you became more alert as you became stimulated, and then your alertness fell off at the end as you became overstimulated. And that was what consciousness was. It was dealing with ideas like that. But actual consciousness itself, there was nothing. And it was a huge gap. And one was all the time going back to Sherrington with his lovely view of the energy theory. Light came in to the eyes, was transmitted by the nerves to the cortex. There was the magic of the enchanted loom, and then science put its finger to its lips and was silent as to how this was created. And that was the area in which we grew up. And as I went to the Maudsley and learnt about philosophy and particularly about the analysts, it became quite clear that there was a huge gap here. Freud would take mental states as far as the mind. For example, if somebody had a transcendent state where they touched the corners of the universe, this was seen as a neurosis. Now, how could it be a neurosis? It was an astonishing thing to say. And we came up through the French philosophers and the idea of hysteria, the wandering of the female womb. These were the sort of ideas we were brought up on. Well, your womb's wandering a bit today, Rupert. Well, I know you don't have one, but if you had one, then you would have the vapours. And so it was all wandering wombs. There was nothing about consciousness. It was really very difficult because there are these fantastic mental states, very wide mental states, and one had to go along the analytical path. The only person was Jung, who saw a much wider view of that. And then with his synchronicity, his interconnectedness, and that leading on to ideas in parapsychology, led to the view that consciousness clearly wasn't limited to the brain. And at that point, one was a heretic. And things became difficult with one's colleagues.
And that, I think, is one of the interesting patterns, isn't it, which obviously we want to look at. The notion of a heretic in science as opposed to a heretic in theology. And luckily, one no longer gets burned at the stake, but one's reputation is very much at stake.
Yes, I think metaphorically one is burnt at the stake. I don't think there's much doubt about that, in the sense that you have to do two things if you're not going to get literally burnt at the stake and thrown out. The first is that you have to be a regular scientist. It's a sort of capital you get. And by doing regular science, you can stop your colleagues from becoming too obnoxious. Because you can say, well, actually, I'm a scientist like you, my colleagues. But if you don't do that, then you find yourself coming out on the limb and you become quite severely criticised.
So there's a sort of very difficult path to tread, from your experience at Maudsley.
Yes, you have to. All the scientists are speaking masked, as Descartes said. You have to speak masked too, so you will drop your ideas into a scientific framework and then say, well, listen, we can expand it this way. You don't like it, oh well. But I mean, this is a possibility, and so one treads a careful path.
Rupert, what about your experience in this respect?
Well, I suppose I'm one of the few people in the scientific world who's actually been publicly proclaimed a heretic by the editor of Nature, who identifies himself with the Pope. Not the present one, the previous one, Sir John Maddox, as he now is. So when my first book, A New Science of Life, came out, his famous editorial in Nature called A Book for Burning really conjured up all this imagery of book burning and the Inquisition. When he was interviewed years later about this, he said on BBC television, Sheldrake deserves to be condemned for the same reason that the Pope condemned Galileo. It's heresy. And, this is, of course I was flattered by being compared with Galileo, but I think more to the point was he was comparing himself with the Pope. And this whole language of heresy, there's a fixed orthodox belief, things that don't fit in are heresy. This is something really that Kuhn pointed out to us, that science is not a matter of objective truth, it's a social construct, it's a collective system of practice, it's a professional group of people who at any given time broadly share a model of reality, a paradigm, and scientific revolutions are when those models change. But within any given paradigm, things that don't fit in, phenomena that don't fit in are anomalies. Consciousness is an anomaly from the mechanistic point of view. So they're ignored or denied or set aside. And ideas that challenge that framework and suggest a different one are heresies. So Kuhn showed us that science is not so different from religion or any other human construct. It's, as Peter said, the way we were taught it, when I was taught it at school and university, it was treated as absolute truth, objective fact. The idea that it was based on a social construct, that it was grown out of a particular cultural context, and so forth, that just wasn't there. Kuhn woke us up to that, and then feminists pointed out, how male-dominated and filled with male chauvinist ideas a lot of the rhetoric of science was, if not the practice of it. And so we are now much more aware of this cultural conditioning of science. It doesn't alter the fact that in trying to change what goes on in science, you still do run into this kind of heretic boundary. There are certain areas like telepathy that are definitely taboo from the point of view of conventional science. And there are people who see it as their business to defend these taboos.
Yes.
The editor of Nature clearly thought it was his job, and a number of science journalists at present think of themselves as gatekeepers of orthodoxy and defending these taboos.